In our last TV theatrical streaming negotiations, self-tape auditions got guidelines, and it's important that you, our members, know exactly what they are. So here are the 5 key changes that make the audition process fairer and more performer-friendly. And trust me, you'll want to know about them. Welcome to Take 5, where we bring you the latest on Sag-Aftra contracts and guidelines. I'm Jody Long, Sag-Aftra National Vice President of Los Angeles and also the Los Angeles Local President. And with me today is Beth Millman, Sag-Aftra Executive Director of Entertainment Contracts, to walk us through these much-needed updates. Beth, hi, welcome.
Hello. Hi, Jody.
There are a number of new self-tape provisions in TV theatrical streaming contracts, and I'd like to kick off this conversation by addressing a common complaint about self-tapes, which is that sometimes actors are asked to read too many pages for an audition. So, is there a limit to how many pages an actor can be asked to read for a first self-tape?
Yes, there is, Jody. So now sides cannot be more than 8 pages for a first self-tape and not more than 12 for a second or subsequent self-tape. Keep in mind that a low-budget theatrical or a low-budget new media contract actually has a 5-page limit for the first audition, and then a subsequent second or third would go to the 12-page limitation. These pages also have to be standard industry pages, so no cramming, teensy tiny little fonts. We want a standard industry page. And also, upon the request of a performer that has a disability, the producers shall make reasonable accommodations to provide materials in a format accessible to the performer.
Okay, moving on. So let's talk about how long performers have to submit their self-tapes.
A producer has to make the breakdowns, the sides, any scripts available to the performer's agent or other representative 48 hours prior to the deadline for submission of the self-tape, 72 hours for a performer who's a minor performer. Keep in mind, sometimes there are emergencies in casting, and these deadlines won't apply if last minute an actor drops out and they have to replace an actor within a day or so, or if there's a new role added to the script very last minute. Then when there are truly exigent circumstances in casting, they won't have to live up to these 48 hours or 72. However, for the most part, this is the rule, and it is what people are learning to now work with.
And that 72 hours takes because of school and going to bed early and all those things, so just to let you know. One of the biggest complaints we've received from our members about self-tape auditions was having to memorize their lines.
You cannot be asked to memorize. So performers can hold sides, they can work with the prompting device, and if a performer is asked to memorize, this is no longer a self-tape, and it instead gets considered what we would call a virtual audition.
The next thing I want to ask you about is feedback from casting about whether or not a role someone has auditioned for has been cast.
We do have increased transparency on whether the role has been cast, and the producer should endeavor to respond to any inquiries a performer or an agent or another representative of the performer has as to whether the role has already been cast.
And that's before you audition, correct?
Yes, you can ask that and say, if I'm going to take the time to do this self-tape, will you please advise me? Am I doing this without anyone being cast, or have you actually cast this role and you just want backups?
All right, I have one more question. What if a performer would rather have a live audition than submit a self-tape to casting?
Now a producer has to provide the opportunity to interview for the role virtually over a Zoom or in person at the producer's office. They get to choose if they want to do a virtual Zoom or an office. Keep in mind the time that they schedule for these live auditions, quote unquote, is scheduled at the producer's election and discretion as far as times on a first come, first served basis. The producer also has to make a reasonable accommodation for performers with disabilities and senior performers, and also has to consider sleep schedules for minors. So basically, we don't want to see a minor performer auditioning at 10 o'clock at night on a school day. So just some common sense rules there.
And get your self-tape requests in person or virtually right in.
They fill up fast, Jody. You are correct.
Thank you so much, Beth, for taking the time to be with us today and taking us through some of the self-tape provisions from the TV theatrical streaming contract. I think it's safe to say that what we've covered here today is something actors can feel confident knowing what guidelines were put in place to help with this self-tape process. If you have any additional questions about self-tape, you can reach out to the Entertainment Contracts Department at Sag-Aftra. I encourage everyone watching today to subscribe to the Sag-Aftra YouTube channel, where you can find more educational videos on Sag-Aftra agreements and contracts. Our mission is to empower our members with information. So thank you for watching.